How should Christians spread the word in a digital age? Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech, a podcast devoted to imitating Jesus in a technological age. We believe in deep thinking with biblical theology, courageous building of good technology, and rich reflection on what it means to be human. I am Andrew Noble. I'm a theology PhD student. I have a background in AI. I'm joined with our two co-hosts, Austin Gravely, social media manager at the Gospel Coalition. He has a background in ministry and online marketing. And Joel Jacob, principal product manager at Splunk, and he has a background in robotics, AI, and engineering. We've never done a series before, but we're doing it. We're like, we need to just focus on one thing over multiple episodes to really make sense of it so that it's a resource to our listeners thinking through this stuff. So this is Multiplying the Word. We will explore the what's, the whys, and the hows of digital marketing. We want to live in the digital world well, but not of it. We hope this podcast will help, and this series will help pastors and Christian organizations help individual believers embrace practices and principles of digital marketing. And we're going to be having conversations with various experts to help us multiply the word in a digital world. Today, our focus is on Christian institutions. We got kind of an intro to all this kind of stuff with Chris Martin last week. This week, we're really focused on Christian institutions, including Christian media organizations. And we're really glad to have Caleb Waite to join us today. That's how you pronounce your last name, right? Just simply Waite, right?
It is. Yeah.
I almost wanted to say Wyatt, which doesn't really make sense, but he is the director of content at Sola Media. I've benefited a ton from Sola Media. It would be an understatement to say that it changed my life because of the White Horse Inn and Michael Horton's weekly episodes there. In the late 2000s, there was a whole young, restless, reformed movement going on. And it's like, what does that reformed thing mean? And those series of podcasts centered me in the gospel and centered me in God ultimately. And so I'm very appreciative for it. So why don't we learn a little bit more about you, Caleb? What's your story?
Yeah.
And thanks for joining us on the pod.
Well, thank you guys. Yeah, it's great to speak with you all. Well, how far back are we going? I'm pretty verbose, so I'll say this. I was kind of caught up in the young, restless, reformed movement in the mid 2000s. I grew up in a Christian home and was super, I don't know, didn't have a lot of theological categories to work with. It was a mix of like fundamentalism and then being in the hardcore metal scene where just charismatic Christian bands were, it was just zeal, but it was not like robust theology, but a lot of zeal. And so it was just like you're growing up, and I was always drawn to philosophical, theological questions, and ended up going to my brother started to go to a church, invited me, and it was a non-denominational church close to us that was part of the Reality family of churches. If you guys are familiar with Jeremy Treat and Reality LA.
Yeah, he's a solid dude.
Yeah. There's a number of them. So I was brought in before Jeremy was. I got baptized there, got super involved. And I was kind of in that new Calvinist incubator, as it were, and I was there for about eight or 9 years. Met my wife there, served there in a variety of capacities, and the goal was always to go to seminary and become a pastor. And then, so in 2017, well, basically, I wasn't too familiar with White Horse Inn and Michael Horton at this time, and kind of accidentally stumbled upon them, got a book of Horton's Ordinary, and saw on the back that he taught at this seminary in California. I didn't know there was a Reformed seminary in California, and that seems interesting. And so, anyway, we visited, we enrolled, moved there in 2017. And I didn't really know exactly what I was getting into. I didn't have much of a clue of the Reformed Presbyterian world that is connected with Westminster. And yeah, I mean, I went in just excited to go to seminary and didn't exactly know about the specific things that we were going to be diving into in class. I just knew it was Greek and Hebrew and church history and theology, and that's it. And I went in thinking the goal was like, I'm either going to do ministry or I'm going to do something with media. And I kind of knew that right away. I was listening to, before we moved to seminary, my wife and I were just kind of getting into, I had been playing podcasts for a while, but the one that we both kind of sat and listened to after work each night was S-Town from NPR.
Oh
Did you
my
guys ever play that?
gosh.
And
That's
so
a name I haven't heard in a long time. My goodness.
I know. And so that was the first kind of instance where I was like, this medium, this format, whatever this is, I want to do something with it. So that, investigative, journalistic podcasting, but a lot of storytelling involved. It's not, mere facts. And so, yeah, I went into seminary with a love for the church, theology, and a desire to unravel a lot of misconceptions about the faith, and also a very high interest in media. And interestingly enough, the vocational opportunities that opened up from there had to do with media and technology, which is not everyone's story. Like, especially like I'm there at seminary, I'm like, this is the responsible thing to do. Get the credentialing done and, go through that process. And yeah, while I did that, all of the friendships, connections, and doors kind of led to these more creative opportunities. And so from there, I've, done writing and podcasting and produced thousands of episodes between White Horse Inn and Sola Media. I kind of interned there while I was in seminary, and then a couple of years later, out of seminary, I took a full-time role there. Yeah, so that's part of the story, but the more
where in that story is mere fidelity? Like, because that was like a couple years for you, social media manager / podcast producer, and then all of a sudden you just talk to them about, hey, why don't we do this new podcast? And then you launch it. Like, they gave you the green light. So how did that?
Well, okay,
there's probably a longer story there, but
well, I was in seminary and I had been listening to I was in seminary in 2017, 2018, 2019, and during that time, I had already been listening, and I was a big fan of Mere Fidelity, and I kept up with their episodes, followed the guys on social media, the hosts. And so I was following Matt Lee Anderson, and I'm never on Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook in so many years. And I would just happen to go on, and I saw that he posted, hey, we're looking for a show manager for Mere Fidelity. I had some beginning internship experience with White Horse, like at White Horse Inn with a new show that they were starting. And I was like, he's never going to respond, but I'll email him. And immediately he was like, yeah, let's set up a meeting and let's talk. And so while I was in seminary, that call happened, and it was, when was that? 2018 or 2019? Anyway, started being the show manager and really managed the show schedule and booking guests was the main part of it, and then kind of facilitating some work with the guy editing the episodes at that time, and then just trying to think more strategically about how to grow Mere Fidelity, how to grow the show. And so yeah, from there, it was kind of started to branch, started to write some stuff for the Gospel Coalition, wrote a thing for Mere Orthodoxy, and started to just build some friendships within this space. And then, yeah, in that time, I I started to share again, going back to being inspired by S Town and that kind of world of that format of podcasting. I started to kind of float that idea around to a lot of different people. When I met Colin Hansen at the 2019 TGC conference, we talked about that. I talked about it with a number of other people, and then I basically, because I was more familiar with the Mere Orthodoxy kind of crew, I was at a like
Hmm.
it would seemed reasonable and be like, I would like to just make something. And so I don't have too much of a strategy behind it. I don't have, I just want to make it. Right. And that's a good place to pitch. Like, they're pretty agile and nimble, and they're like, yay, if you want to do it. Right. So I pitched that to Jake Meador at Mere Orthodoxy, and he said, this seems great, but I can't really be involved. You're going to need someone to partner with you. And so then I started to think about who I'd want to invite on as the co-host. And honestly, I don't say this confidently about too many things, but it was completely the Lord's providence that I ended up speaking with Joshua Haven, and
Who is a Amarillo native, I might add.
That's
So
right.
he is from my neck of the woods.
That's right. Yeah. And he and I have never met in person. But anyway, that working with him, I pitched it to him. He came on board, and he was completely fantastic. And so we made a 13-part series on the origin story of the Nicene Creed. And Josh is, I went to seminary, but he's a New Testament scholar, but he also knows a lot about the patristics use of Scripture, and so he was just phenomenal. He was and so we've had a
And
great
it's a really
friend.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think very highly of Passages. I loved that so much. I hope you'll get to do a second season, maybe someday.
Thank you,
maybe?
Austin. Yes, it's in the. I mean, but eventually, yes, it's going to happen. But yeah, Josh came on board, and we produced this huge 13-part series that, I mean, though I made it with no budget, in my garage, one microphone, the people we got to talk to, the topics we covered, we're very proud of what that work ended up being. Yeah, but from there, as far as work in media, things have kind of just built and branched off, spiraled,
Mhm.
if you will, um, from there. But I've always been eager to try to tackle what are the misconceptions about Christianity. The doctrine of the Trinity, and especially the origins of Nicaea, is a big one. So if we can take that story and turn it into like the investigative journalist format, those were the things that got me excited. And I still like to do, even though I'm not currently producing things at Sola that is in that same investigative journalistic format. I'm still trying to take the same idea of like, what are the misconceptions? What are the things that there's so many tropes about online, the things that are so easily misunderstood. What are those things, and how can we not just like lambaste the people who share them, but how can we
Mhm.
re-educate, correct, and model a different way of theological inquiry, theological thinking, and practice, for people curious about these things in and outside of the church.
Very cool. One thing that's interesting about that, like it's long form, I think about Wes Huff, who most Christians are becoming familiar with who this apologist
Yeah.
is, because he went on Joe Rogan, the most popular podcast on the planet. And you had there in that podcast a long form deep dive where you're really getting some things unpacked. And podcasts kind of lend themselves to a deep dive on various subjects. And one of the things that Wes talked about on an episode of Apologetics Canada is that if you look at the trajectory of what ended up getting him invited onto that podcast was short form response videos.
Yes.
Like he started with short form response videos to Billy Carson. And it was because people were seeing those short videos, not the long ones, that he ended up getting invited onto the debate with Billy Carson, where stuff happened. You can read about this otherwise. But there seems to be this, okay, long form has a ton of potential for breaking the misconceptions, as you talked about, informing people on the reality of things, and a high level of engagement factor too. And yet you also have like you at Sola Media, you guys are producing stuff on Twitter. Like I see stuff of Michael Horton reaction videos that he's doing, right? Like I'm like, whoa. I never would have thought if you would have talked to me 10 years ago that Michael Horton would be producing reaction videos. And so you are the director of content. So kind of transitioning from the story to your process and thought process and workflow, how are you thinking about producing media in a digital age? Do you see posting to socials as a necessary evil to bring people to the long form content? Do you see it as a good in itself? How are you thinking about your role in the content you're producing on various platforms?
Yeah, that's a lot of cognitive dissonance is the answer.
This is the way.
Yeah. I think it can get pretty philosophical from here, and I think the first thing I'll say, I don't think there is a foolproof, hermetically sealed right answer as to like here's why we can practice this, and here's why there's no vices entangled up in it. I think I guess here's how I try to distinguish some of it. It's not about trying to. I want to maybe take a step back and not just they think about this in terms of short forms of media and formats and trends that you can interact with, but I would say media can be an art. Obviously, film, and then written media. All of those things take a particular kind of craftsmanship. I would say the more long form stuff you do, the easier it is to lean into that kind of craftsman area of how you navigate a conversation, how you facilitate a discussion in a long form kind of format. I think when you make content for platforms specifically, it's like now it's less about art and craftsmanship, even though like that can be, I mean, there can be skill involved in any single thing anyone is doing, making, producing. But the short form things are pretty much contingent on the platform itself, right? They don't stand alone outside of the platform. They don't make sense outside of the ecosystem of this digital environment of which you're posting things on, and X, YouTube, Instagram. And so I think that's where it's less of I think less in terms of like craftsmanship, art, and more in terms of that is a derivative of of the art of the longer form conversation of the episode, what have you. I'm not saying like that's all bad, but I would say I would de- delineate and distinguish between those two things. The conversations, even other some types of videos and podcasts can stand on their own outside of a platform, right? But if you're making content that only makes sense on Facebook, on Instagram, those are different things. And I, I try to bridge the two in thinking like not even all of these are technology properly. Like making a short for a platform isn't your own use of technology. You are kind of like that technology, that platform. You're kind of just building up, building it up. You are serving a lot of its purposes, right? It tells you what kind of thumbnails work, and you bend over backwards. It tells you what kind of short form editing works and how fast, and you kind of have to accommodate. So that the more you're doing that, you're not even really like using technology, and you're not even really like using art. You are seeing like this is the technology and its requirements. How can we accommodate, and how much do we accommodate, right? And again, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there. I think there's certain folks on our team who are much more earnest about it and be like, that's just how it is, and they don't think
That's the
twice.
algorithm.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like there's certain folks who will hear this and be very bothered, or be very introspective and be like, "Whoa, that makes me rethink all social media or digital media consumption." There's some folks who are like, "Yeah, that makes sense. It's a product, it's a tool, and businesses have to accommodate," and that they're not as bothered, and that's I guess that can be fine. um i I would say we don't have a clear philosophy as to how much we are willing to accommodate, and where we're saying we're not going to accommodate with the algorithmic in incentives. Without trying to keep pulling the thread on this, does that make sense? Do you want to steer in another?
No, I appreciate your honesty. Like, because you could have been like, well, here are the 5 principles we abide by, and then it's very easy to make a decision. But the reality is that it's very difficult to, like, I've seen some Christian media organizations be okay with TikTok, and I've seen some that stay away from it. Like, they make a decision on a per platform basis.
Sure.
Because of the degree to which they're willing to accommodate each machine, because it's like each has its own machine. I have this article written by someone named Caleb Wyatt. Wait, the medium is the mania, anxiety as the feature, not a bug, of digital media, which you wrote, and you talked about how it's one aspect of the machine is it creates anxiety. That's the feature of it, because anxiety produces these effects, and that's good for the machine. So the machine, if you're posting on Instagram, that Instagram machine is doing all this harm, and so you're trying to make sense of that. And I appreciate the honesty. Like, I feel the same way. And then I'll have some days where I read an article like the medium is the mania, and I'll go, maybe I shouldn't be on these platforms at all.
Yeah.
And then I'll have other days where I see the impact of a Wes Huff, and I go, it's worth it. Like, Tim Keller was once pushed back on for posting on Twitter as much as he does.
Mhm.
And he would actually respond to comments. And I remember him being asked directly, like, well, what are you doing? Like, don't you realize the harms? And he's like, I get the harms. I get all that. But do you realize how many people are viewing that?
Yes.
Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
should we not multiply the word? Should we not see this opportunity to, move the boat out on the water so that more people will hear? It's just that now moving the boat out onto the water as Jesus did has a lot more anxiety producing and negative producing results. So it's just complicated.
I want to actually push back a little bit on the anxiety producing aspects of digital media as being like unique to digital media. Like, I want to tap into our conversation with Jeff Bilbro and ask, like, is it just digital media that's anxiety producing, or is that an inherent side effect of sin in any media? I don't necessarily think, if you go back to the height of the steam printing press, where, contrary to Neil Postman's kind of rosy nostalgia of a past, like maybe he doesn't have the most like accurate representation of what the literate world was like in terms of what people were reading. People were reading a lot of yellow journalism and porn and all sorts of other things, and that's going to be anxiety producing just by virtue of its association with sin. And so I wonder if I hear the conversation about the machine and the algorithms, and I completely agree 100%. But my thought on my philosophy on that, at least with respect to TTC, has been these things are here, and we don't really have a choice as to whether we're going to engage with them. It's a question of, one, how do we engage with them? How much do we accommodate them? But what is more important, that we seek to multiply the word in obedience to what God has called us to do in these corners of digital Babylon that God has sent us to? Because if we focus so much on the algorithms and machines, like, should we go on TikTok? Should we not go on TikTok? It's like, okay, there comes a point where it's like the Babylonian occupation is already here. Like, we're not going back to a time where TikTok has not colonized Gen Z.
Yeah, and I would even like raise that to another level, just like even broader than digital media, is just like the sensory input we have with technology now.
Yeah,
is just like at a level that can create anxiety or creates a response that maybe wasn't there in a previous time. So making it more personal from my world with like technology development, we're like, oh my gosh, there's new models, there's new things happening all the time, like the pace of innovation is like accelerating, and like that, even if I'm not in like a social context, just knowing that this is what's being released, or these new apps came out, this new innovation came out, it's just like also creates this response of like, oh, the pace is so fast,
right?
It's like frenetic.
And I'm not trying to say that there aren't some things unique to digital media that it creates like uniquely digital anxieties, but I don't know if it's only digital media that creates those anxieties. Like, I think of like TikTok in particular. I mean, that's the one that is kind of easy for us to lean in on, because we know that TikTok is uniquely destructive in people. Like, we know that there is something about TikTok that changes people in ways that Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube don't, by the nature of its algorithm. But I mean, if I'm thinking about like Daniel being brought into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and how toxic that must have been for his soul as a God-fearing Jew. He is surrounded by the highest excesses of the most powerful pagan empire to probably ever exist in the ancient world. And yet God sent him there to be his representative and to speak the word in that space. And so, as dangerous as these places are, I'm not denying it at all, the dangers that come with it. What is more important is if God has called some of us to go to these places to do these things despite the dangers, is that more important than zoning in on how bad these platforms are?
Yeah, all the points are well taken. Clearly, I mean, I'm producing media, and we're making and shipping a bunch of new stuff. So it's not that I'm a complete purist that says burn it all, escape, retreat, and
Right.
you know right.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying that you are at all. Like, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I'm just clearing my own throat. But the day we're recording this, we just released a conversation between Mike Horton and Glenn Scribner, and
nice.
It's a great conversation in that Glenn shared that story that this post that was trending last fall. Did you guys see this? It was this infographic of like where did couples meet?
Yeah.
Through history.
Oh. Yeah,
and it was like
online.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, in history, it was, church, third places, all that stuff was way high. And then over the years, it's so multiple times dwarfed meeting people, even like it's not through friend groups. It's not through friends at all. It's rarely at church. Yeah.
Swiping right on a dating app.
It's online. And I think that to me is the story that kind of summarizes what you're talking about, Austin, in the sense of if churches and other smaller Christian institutions are also worried about, playing the marketing game. Like, are we going to be the church? Are we going to try to like really run Facebook ads and Google AdSense this and like is that what we're going? Is that like that seems pretty manipulative? That's just like trying to get butts in pews and trying to And I get that there is completely a way that the big mega churches do purposefully do that and like to see it as an opportunity. I understand that, but at the same time, if you think about that infographic, people are not meeting like in person anymore, right? They're meeting online. And I think that just tells you about the reality of, therefore, if you are doing something online, if you're sharing, if you're, saying, hey, we're open, we're doing stuff. Here's a picture of, if you're sharing that and if you're giving people previews into the life and community of your church, and if you're doing Christian media, I think you can. It doesn't make it all neutral. It doesn't make it without complication, but it does. It recognizes the reality of you can do this. You can create stuff and share it online. And it actually isn't all about like this gimmicky marketing campaign.
Right.
Because that's not what people do online. And people are just online. That is just where they are. And that's where their relationships are forming, are taking place.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I wouldn't say, therefore, go out and post. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say when you do post, you don't have to be too afraid of looking like a gimmicky marketing guy. Yeah.
Well, and two, our confidence in doing this work in these spaces should not be necessarily in the forms of our content, because it's not the forms of our content that make our teaching or our evangelism or our apologetics powerful and effective. It is the Spirit who makes those things efficacious, and the Spirit is pleased to use diverse means to accomplish his ends. I mean, that's a core tenet of a reformed view of the Spirit and the sovereignty of God. And so what we should be aiming for in being in these spaces is not that we try to be, cool, hip, relevant, how do you do, fellow kids vibe, but asking the Spirit to bless our work, to lead it, to use this work to lead to people the Spirit is at work in already in their lives, and use that as a as a means of glorifying God and serving our neighbor. I mean, I think about the Wes Huff, the Wes Huff phenomenon. I mean, calling it a phenomenon is kind of weird, but it also kind of works. And just like how many like future church leaders or pastors or missionaries will be able to point to that someday down the road and say, this was a stepping stone for me wanting to study the Bible more, or wanting to go to seminary, or wanting to consider church ministry. Like that's the thing that should be our hope, is that even though, yeah, going on, Joe Rogan is a once in a lifetime thing that is propping up this massive media empire that talks about all sorts of stuff that we wouldn't endorse or promote or,
Sure.
condone. It's like, what is the Spirit doing when things like this happen? Like, how is the Spirit going to use this in building up his church?
Okay, so I've got a practical application question then, like based on this topic, where I've been seeing some more content, let's say on the cutting edge of applying different technical tools. So there's user-generated content, right, which is someone like talking head, right? And then there's now AI user-generated content, which is something I've been seeing, and I'm like, this is interesting. And then there's just like AI generated content. So it doesn't have to be a fake person. It could just be like B-roll, or, there's like app footage or something like that. And I recently saw in like a niche developer community, people making like, a Bible app or something. And then one person was like using, there was a marketer, it was a girl in her car, and she was like talking about like, hey, like, oh yeah, like I use this app for this thing, like study notes or something. And it was a real person. But then, seeing that getting taken to AI generated people, I was like, yeah, these are interesting things where it's like there probably is like a plethora just by the volume of unique ads and impressions and stuff. There is a bunch of people that will be positively impacted by that. But it like touches a nerve where I'm like, I don't know what I think.
Sure.
And if I could just load up the question more, the White Horse Sin was really big on radio at first. And they, to my knowledge, in the history of the White Horse Inn, they were one of the first to really move from radio onto the podcast format. They were on the cutting edge of that. They're on the cutting edge of the new technology known as the internet, no longer localized to your radio station in the context of, oh, you're at 92.5, this is Christian.
Yeah.
No. You're just online now and allowing for anybody to access it anywhere. The desire to make it efficiently accessible, widespread was clearly one of the reasons why it went online. To my knowledge, you've recently discontinued these books.
I'm so sad. Breaks my
Sola
heart.
Media. You're
Breaks my
clearly thinking about the cutting edge of these technologies, and AI is naturally the next step.
AI is naturally in. We have no choice.
Well.
Yeah.
How do you think about it?
Yeah. Man, there's a lot to say. I will say, speaking of Modern Reformation magazine, which started before I was born.
Yeah, that started in the 70s?
No, 91.
Oh, wow. Oh, so it started when I was born. Okay.
Yeah. No, but it was, yes, we love the magazine. A lot of that, we wrestled a lot for years and years about the philosophical implications of what it would mean to wind down a fine print magazine and go to digital only. So many others have done it. For us, I think like the short answer is like we all have our own constraints. The amount of time it takes a staff to produce that magazine,
I can't even imagine.
Like, how much time could you then, if you didn't have to do that, how much time could you devote towards other ventures? That's really where a lot of the give and take is. It's like when you have a small team and a certain just like reality are these constraints, right? And there's other opportunities to pursue. what will give. And that's, I mean, when it comes to AI though, you could say, this seems to be expedient, this seems to be helpful in these ways, or that. I would not venture into, like, I wouldn't even like dare to try to speculate about the ethics involved in using AI to do like a simple like Google search and stuff like that, of like, what's the recipe for this?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a helpful question because, as Marshall McLuhan has said, every every piece of technology is also an amputation. I like that's not verbatim, but I think
It's the spirit. That's the spirit of the
yeah,
quote.
yeah. And so I get that with AI. What are you amputating, right? In order to have the more expedient work done. But honestly, it's developing so fast and so furiously. I think so much of the speculation about it is a waste of time. So much is a complete, like, there's so many AI companies that are massive that are going bankrupt this year. Like, there's not going to be too many that are going to be long-standing in the way that Open AI is, and a few others. But there's so many that are going to go away because, honestly, the finances aren't there. Right now, it's fun to tinker with so many of the open sources that are out there. But all of that can change tomorrow. All of that can completely drastically change. So I would just pump the brakes on, like, whatever. I mean, especially, there's so much trash AI content online now that is basically just saying, open this thread, I'll teach you the 3 ways to make $1 million a day, an hour, right? And it's all fake. It's all not real. And so I'd say wait until some of the dust settles on some of the products that are being shipped by the biggest players in this game, and then talk about those. And then there's also going to be another, like, sociological factor at play, which is status and class, because it's going to be a huge status flex in the next in a short amount of time to be more of a Luddite, to be to have. It's going to be. I mean, I'm not sure if it will be like,
it's a luxury.
It'll have It's going to be a luxury, and it's going to be sought after, and it's going to be probably more than like the trad wife cottagecore aesthetic stuff that is a thing now. It's probably going to be like that is there's going to be temptation to chase that clout, to taste.
Yeah, it's
chase
like
that.
The admiration of like handmade furniture, where it's like, like the prefabbed factory built furniture is like more cost effective and like flooding the market, and then there's like if you have the means, then this elegantly crafted wood,
for sure.
By
but of course,
neighbor down
I
the
understand.
road.
I understand if you're not well off enough, and so therefore you must use Chat GPT. Like, that's going to be kind of the air. I mean, I can't say
we're already.
For certain.
I think we're already there. This didn't get included in the recording. This happened after we finished recording our conversation with Keith Plummer. But one of the things we talked about with me and Andrew and Keith after the call is a lot of the tech media discipleship discourse has kind of become stratified along certain class and educational lines, to where in order to live a certain level of like tech-free, media-free discipled life, you have to have a certain like threshold of education and a certain level of income to be able to afford meaningful alternatives, like meaningful analog alternatives to a screen-free life. And I think if we look at how Google over the past decade plus funneled countless Chromebooks into the public education system to where, like, if you can't afford private school where you have, qualified instructors deliberately foregoing tech to go, whether it's Montessori or some other classical
Waldorf.
education. Yeah, like, you're gonna get stuck with learning on a Chromebook. Like, we're already there. Like, I don't think it's a question of if. Like, it's been true for a while, and it's only going to carry on further with the AI conversation too.
Yeah. We like the .com. I don't know if you guys can recall, like, that .com boom, right? We had this Cambrian explosions of everyone just slapping like .com to their company, pet.com, and a lot of them died. And then, there were a few that actually said, like, this is actually where the value comes. We're in the same, probably first or second inning of that Cambrian explosion with AI, with everyone slapping AI and, huge amounts of investments being like, this is unique. And then seeing, like, okay, actually, in my world, there's a product called Cursor.ai, which is for code development for engineers. And they are actually one of the fastest now, growing to 100 million in revenue. People are actually paying because it does actually help the work, right? So those are like, these are some of the winners, and what are they doing? So,
yeah, that's great, because there's going to be a lot that's just going to go away soon because the revenue's not there.
So a few kind of super practical, quick questions. What's your workflow for recording a podcast for the White Horse Inn? How do you set that up? Schedule, sit down, hit record, edit, schedule, produce. Is it that simple?
Man, that is White Horse Inn is a bit of a beast. We have a few podcasts. We have Core Christianity with Adriel Sanchez, White Horse Inn, Know What You Believe with Mike Horton, and we're releasing new instantations of content. Depending on when this comes out, we're gonna be shipping a whole new podcast product in March, and it's going to be directed towards kids and families.
Let's go.
We're excited about. All of them are completely different. Every workflow. For White Horse Inn, we have two hosts on the East Coast, Justin Holcomb and Walter Strickland. And then we have Bob Hiller, our Lutheran host, and Mike Horton. They're in North County, San Diego, where the offices are. And so what we do is since they're all busy, we book their schedules and our recording dates out way in advance. And we are now doing remote recordings. We were flying them in to record every 6 weeks. And so to book that is almost a year in advance. We're setting the dates to record. And we were every 6 weeks batching 2 months of episodes. So you're recording 2 days every 6 weeks, and each day you're recording 4 to 5 episodes. And so when they would come in, I would do the prep, and I would meet with our chief content officer, and we would go over the themes that we want the series to be. We do monthly series, and so we decide that way in advance as well. And then I am the one who does all of the pre-production kind of research and show notes for the hosts. And so I'll work on that. It ends up being a packet of notes that's around 20 to 30 pages. And
I bet that's
my associate only gives me 10 pages, and so it's just not as much for What Would Jesus Tech at this point.
I bet that's a really edifying process for you, though, like to get to spend that time like putting that material together. Like, I bet that's really enjoyable.
Yes, and it's frustrating when they don't talk about it. No, it's fine. It is like herding cats, though.
This is a good example of, again, like you have like in-person podcasting and like having the notes as like a higher quality, more investment than like, okay, now you're using technology,
they're remote now. But now they are.
You're taking advantage of the lower cost technology solutions.
Yes, for now. And so part of that is has to do like scheduling travel. Honestly, the flights from Orlando and North Carolina to San Diego are miserable. Like
I
there's
can't
no
even.
direct.
I can't even
There's
fathom.
no direct flight. So it's like
I think the hardest part of podcasting is scheduling.
Oh,
it's
Correct me if
the
I'm
hardest
wrong.
part. I
It's just,
agree.
it's brutal.
It's
Like
a
as soon
huge
as
part of my
Austin and
work.
Joel say, "Oh, I don't know if our schedule is going to be the same," I'm like, "No, we can't do it. We need to record Friday afternoons.
Yeah,
It's the only time. I'm not rearranging. I cannot schedule guests." Ugh.
It is a huge part of my job, and so now it's kind of exemplified. We're having conversations like we booked Ross Douthat, we booked all of these other guests now speaking with Mike on that podcast, and now we're working with contractors on the podcast for kids and families, and so a lot of it is that. And then when they actually arrive to record, I kind of breathe a sigh of relief because a lot of
it's like
that work is done.
They made it. Yeah.
They made it. And so we'll batch record. So we're recording White Horse Inn on Thursday next week. And but now because we're remote, we're recording a little more frequently. And now we're just batching 1 month's. We're not doing 2 days of recording. And so
Right.
that will happen. Host will go home, and then our post-production team has the material, and we have one lead producer, and then two media coordinators, associate producers under him. And so, but we're like, we used to produce our small team of like 4 people. We were producing and shipping a daily live Q&A show every day of the week. And White Horse Inn, which is 52 episodes a year, and special one-off stuff. And now we've adjusted that somewhat. Our core radio show is now weekly, and now it's digital only. White Horse Inn is down to about 40 new episodes a year, but that's because we made room for, now we're going to be releasing 2 or 3 episodes with Mike Horton. And so with that, his show it has a few different segments. There's the response reaction stuff that I essentially am the one who goes out, I research, forage around for the thing I want Mike to respond to, and I'll clip and prep him, and we'll record 2 or 3 of those at a time. And again, it's the same post-production team that has it all, though. It's like 3 people that are published, like editing and publishing probably 250 new plus episodes a year.
Yeah.
If not more. So, yeah. Sorry.
Impressive.
Did that answer some of the, as far as
yeah.
Post-production edits are its own thing. There's like there's like a content draft, and where all like the big mistakes and coughing fits are taken out, and then there's like a quality control draft, and then it's basically ready to go, and then it goes into my hands again, and I'm the one who kind of siphons it for the derivative content that we post on all the other platforms.
Because it's interesting who you select for that, because I was the social media manager for a time for Mere Fidelity, and I found myself knowing I could make this little 60-second clip go very viral because it's very controversial. And I'd be like, no, like these guys don't need that. They need the like, if you're going to hear that quote, you need to hear it in context. And so I'd refuse to pick that kind of thing for the sake of virality. Part of it is the nature of Mere Fidelity is its thoughtful discussions and that sort of thing. So it didn't feel like it fit the vibe compared to I don't know, some podcasts, like our podcast, I choose the most controversial thing our guest says and we just roll with, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, you got to think about those principles. I do have one more question, but Austin or Joel, do you have anything else?
No, I
No,
want
it's
to
really
hear your
good
question.
for me. Yeah.
Okay. Can we save this question because it's more direct and personal and it's an ethical thing? So can we save it for our Patreon listeners? You okay with that, Caleb?
Yeah, whatever you guys want.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for listening to What Would Jesus Tech? We're doing a +1 question with Caleb to resolve my ethical dilemma. You can subscribe to our podcast. You already subscribed, right? You don't just listen to a podcast and not hit subscribe. You got to hit subscribe. And I know some people do that. They'll watch the whole YouTube video and then they won't hit the like button or the subscribe thing. I get it.
Just hit the bell. Just ring the bell, guys. Come on.
Do that kind of stuff. It's really helpful. And you can support us on Patreon, which is another interesting aspect of being a digital media organization is how do you ask people to send you money? Do you cut halfway through the White Horse Inn and say, we'll send you a free book if you give to us for any amount, which is an interesting thing that worked for me. I gave to White Horse Inn multiple times. Anyways, thank you for listening. Take care. Goodbye. Okay. My ethical question for you is